The air in the cabin was tense, heavy with anticipation. The plane was almost ready to take off, but something was wrong. Everyone could feel it, the subtle shift that had gone unnoticed by most, but not by Marcus. His hands were steady as he held his boarding pass, eyes locked with the flight attendant blocking his path. Her arms were crossed defensively and her gaze was cold. "Sir, you obviously don't belong in first class," the attendant Janet said with a smirk. Her tone wasn't just condescending, it was dismissive, as though his very presence in that section of the plane was a mistake that needed correcting. Marcus Williams, CEO of a successful aviation consulting firm, stood in silence. He wasn't a man easily rattled. Dressed casually in a simple hoodie and jeans, his unassuming appearance was likely what led Janet to make her hasty judgment. She saw a man who didn't fit the typical first-class passenger mold, and her bias kicked in, but she didn't know who she was dealing with. The flight attendant's voice echoed through the cabin, growing louder as she repeated herself, trying to assert her authority. The murmurs of fellow passengers began to grow too. Whispers passed between rows, some intrigued, others uneasy. Janet's voice carried across the aisle, amplifying the embarrassment for all to hear. "First class is for premium passengers only," she said, with a finality that could have shattered any weaker man. "You need to move to coach." Marcus held up his boarding pass, calm and unwavering. "This is my seat," he said simply. Janet barely glanced at the ticket. Her eyes skimmed the boarding pass before dismissing it with a wave of her hand. "Obviously a mistake," she said, with a laugh that was sharp and cutting. "Let me see your ID." Without hesitation, Marcus handed her his driver's license, remaining composed. Janet studied it with exaggerated suspicion, holding it at arm's length, as though she were scrutinizing a counterfeit. "This doesn't match our passenger manifest," she said. Her words hung in the air, laden with doubt. But Marcus didn't flinch. He was prepared. "Could you check again?" he asked, his tone polite yet firm. "Marcus Williams, confirmation number RT457991. The seconds felt like hours as Janet's fingers moved rapidly over the tablet screen. She glanced at the boarding pass again, then back at Marcus, her expression unchanging. "I've been doing this job for 12 years, she snapped. "I know when someone doesn't belong up here." It wasn't just a matter of denying Marcus a seat. It was about the power dynamic she had constructed in her mind. The idea that someone like him, dressed casually, didn't have the right to sit in first class. The scene was escalating, but Janet was too proud to back down. Meanwhile, in seat 4B, a woman named Lily had already pulled out her phone. She started recording, a small act that would soon turn the tide. As she began live streaming the exchange, the comments started flooding in. "This is outrageous. Someone call the captain. It's discrimination." The crowd of passengers grew more restless. Janet's authority was slipping away and the quiet stirrings of rebellion were rising. Lily's stream gained traction and soon the number of viewers climbed steadily. The time on the clock ticked down. 5 minutes until takeoff. Marcus remained calm as ever. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, showing Janet his digital boarding pass. It was clear, undeniable. His seat was 2A, first class, premium select, but Janet wasn't convinced. "Anyone can fake a digital ticket," she retorted. "I need to see your credit card receipt." Marcus's jaw tightened ever so slightly, but he kept his voice steady. "I shouldn't need to prove my right to sit in a seat I legitimately purchased," he replied, his words slow and deliberate. "I'm trying to help you avoid embarrassment here. Let's resolve this after takeoff." A man from seat 5A, trying to be helpful, leaned in. Maybe he used miles to upgrade last minute, he suggested, but Janet wasn't listening to reason. "No, upgrades go to frequent flyers, real business travelers," she said, eyes narrowing. "Not people trying to sneak into first class." The words were thinly veiled prejudice, and everyone could feel it. Marcus didn't react. Instead, his hand moved ever so slightly to his jacket pocket, where something metallic caught the light. But he didn't pull it out just yet. There were just minutes left. The tension in the cabin was palpable. With the seconds slipping away, Janet did the only thing she could think of. She called for help. "David," she said into the intercom, her voice strained. "I need you up here." Seconds later, the supervisor, David Park, appeared, walking toward them with a look of annoyance. It was clear he didn't expect this to be anything more than a routine seating issue. "What's the problem here?" he asked, a slight edge to his voice. Janet wasted no time explaining. "This passenger claims to belong in first class," she said, frustration rising in her voice. "But he's not on our premium passenger list." Marcus didn't lose his composure. His voice remained smooth and confident. "I'm Marcus Williams," he said, holding out his boarding pass once again. "My ticket clearly indicates seat 2A. David took the boarding pass, studying it closely. He glanced up at Marcus, his face unreadable. "This could be a system printing error," he said, looking down at the pass again. But then he did something unexpected. He checked the manifest. The words fell from his lips, and the cabin went silent. "A is assigned to Monsieur Williams, CEO of Williams Aviation Consulting," he said, his voice a mix of realization and shock. For the first time, Janet's face flushed bright red, but her pride wouldn't allow her to back down. "That's not him," she said quickly, though her voice faltered. "A CEO would look different. He'd be in business attire, not a hoodie." The tension was at a boiling point. Passengers were pulling out their phones, recording the unfolding drama. Lily's live stream reached 847 viewers and climbing. The scene had already started to snowball. The words Janet had used to humiliate Marcus were now being used to expose her own arrogance. The silence in the cabin was thick with anticipation. Marcus stood there, still composed, his calm demeanor in stark contrast to the tension around him. He wasn't backing down, and neither was Janet. David's voice cracked the stillness, but the words he spoke only deepened the growing sense of disbelief. "It says you're the CEO of Williams Aviation Consulting." "Mr. Williams," David repeated, glancing at the manifest one more time. "But that can't be right." Janet's eyes darted nervously, her disbelief now shifting toward irritation. She waved her hand dismissively. "That can't be him. A CEO would be wearing a suit, not that." Her eyes flicked up and down Marcus's casual attire, her prejudice evident in the way she sized him up. Janet was stuck on a simple assumption. Someone dressed like him couldn't possibly be someone important, someone who truly belonged in first class. But Marcus wasn't just anyone. He was a man with immense influence, a man who had the power to change entire systems, and Janet's refusal to see beyond her bias was about to cost her dearly. Just then, a passenger in seat 6A, a middle-aged businessman, stood up. He could feel the mounting tension and tried to intervene. Maybe he used frequent flyer miles to upgrade, the man suggested, his voice tentative but earnest. It wasn't a bad guess, but Marcus shook his head, responding before Janet could interject. "No," Marcus said firmly. "I bought this ticket. Full price. I'm not here by mistake." Janet shot him a look, the skepticism still present, but now there was something else. Fear. The kind of fear that comes when you've overstepped and you know it. "Ma'am," Marcus continued, his voice even and calm, "I'm not trying to make things difficult. I'm simply asking for you to check your records again." He could feel the weight of the moment shifting. His composure was starting to get to her. There was power in his patience, in his calm insistence that she admit her mistake. And then, as if to heighten the tension even more, the clock in the cabin ticked down to just a few minutes before takeoff. The passengers, who had been quietly observing, began to murmur amongst themselves. Some were checking their phones, others watching the drama unfold. Soon a few started filming, capturing the scene in real time for the world to see. Lily, the woman in 4B, had her phone raised high, documenting every word, every gesture. She'd been watching this interaction with growing disbelief, and now the situation had escalated to a level she couldn't ignore. Her Instagram live stream was quickly gaining viewers. The comments were pouring in fast. "This is crazy," one person typed. "Is she really denying him his seat? I can't believe this. Somebody stop this woman." Lily's followers were growing by the second, each comment adding to the public exposure of Janet's arrogance. It was clear that something was about to break, and Janet, for all her authority, didn't see it coming. David stepped closer, his expression now more serious. He knew something wasn't right. "I'll check with the captain," he said, his voice quieter now, the tension in the air obvious to everyone. "We'll get this sorted out." But Marcus wasn't about to let it go that easily. His patience had run out. "No, David," he said, his voice steady. "I'm going to speak with the captain myself." And then something else happened. As Marcus spoke, he reached into his jacket pocket again. This time, his fingers closed around something metallic, something that gleamed in the dim light of the cabin. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't even a threat. It was just power. The subtle shift in Marcus's posture was enough to make the other passengers take notice. Something was changing and they could feel it. Lily's live stream hit 1,000 viewers. The comments began to explode. "Is he really going to handle this himself?" Someone typed. "Who is this guy?" Another person asked. "Is he important? What's going to happen next?" The digital audience was captivated, glued to their screens, waiting to see what would unfold. David, still unsure about what was really happening, turned back toward Janet. "You really should check with the captain," he repeated, trying to offer her a way out. "This is a big misunderstanding." But Janet wasn't listening. Her stubbornness was now apparent and her fear of admitting fault was growing. "You don't understand," Janet snapped. "I've been doing this job for 12 years. I know when someone doesn't belong in first class." The way she said it felt like a final judgment. She wasn't just denying Marcus his seat. She was denying his very right to be there. But Marcus wasn't the kind of man to back down, not when it mattered most. "I'll speak to the captain myself," he said again, his voice unwavering. "And if you can't verify my seat, I'll be contacting your corporate office." That struck a chord. Janet's eyes widened for just a moment, and for the first time she hesitated. "Corporate office?" she muttered, her voice faltering. "Why would you—" Marcus didn't wait for her to finish her sentence. Instead, he turned and walked toward the front of the plane, heading toward the cockpit with a purpose. As he moved, the cabin grew quieter. The passengers were on edge, watching intently. Janet's authority was slipping away, and Marcus's quiet confidence was starting to dominate. Lily's live stream was now approaching 2,000 viewers. The number kept climbing and the comments were coming in faster than ever. "Call the captain," one person urged. "This is ridiculous." Marcus didn't even glance back. His focus was clear, his steps purposeful. As he reached the front of the plane, he was met by the captain's voice over the intercom. "Flight attendants, prepare for departure." The captain's voice crackled through the speakers. And then, as if on cue, Marcus stopped. He turned to face the flight attendant and her supervisor, who had both followed him up to the front. His expression was calm but unwavering. "I need to speak with the captain," Marcus said, his tone still controlled. "Now." David glanced nervously at Janet, who was now pale, her bravado crumbling before Marcus's calm demeanor. But Marcus wasn't done yet. He needed to make sure Janet understood the weight of what she was doing, and what was about to come next, and that was when he made his next move, his most powerful one yet. The tension in the cabin reached a breaking point as Marcus stood at the front, poised and unflinching. The captain's voice, now crackling over the intercom, was the only sound cutting through the silence. "Flight attendants, prepare for departure," the captain called. It was the cue for the final moments before takeoff. But everything about this moment felt wrong. The weight of the situation, an ordinary seating dispute escalating into something much larger, was clear to everyone in the cabin. Marcus turned, facing Janet and David, who had now followed him up front. Janet's face was pale, her eyes darting nervously between Marcus and the growing group of passengers watching. She had crossed a line, but didn't know just how far the ripple effects would stretch. "Look, I understand you're trying to do your job," Marcus said, his voice calm yet laden with something else now, authority. "But I need to speak with the captain." David glanced at Janet, the unease growing in his eyes. The whole situation was spiraling, and he could feel it. The air in the cabin grew thick with uncertainty as every second passed. Janet, still defiant, tried to maintain control, though it was obvious she was losing her grip. Her words came out sharper now, tinged with frustration. "The captain doesn't deal with seating issues," she said, trying to assert herself one last time. "I've already told you your seat is not—" Marcus cut her off, his words deliberate and calm but cutting through the tension like a knife. "I'm not moving. I've paid for this seat, and I'd like to speak to the captain. Now." The growing murmurs from the other passengers were impossible to ignore. Some were starting to record, some whispering about how they couldn't believe what was happening. The realization began to hit them. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was something far bigger. Lily's Instagram Live had exploded in real time, now pushing 5,000 viewers. The comments were rolling in faster than anyone could read. People were sharing the stream across social media platforms, and the narrative was shifting. "This is crazy," one comment said. "She can't be serious. Someone needs to step in." Justice in real time, another person wrote. He's not backing down. This is going viral. It was clear Janet was no longer in control of the situation. Marcus had become the center of attention, not just in the cabin but for thousands of people watching online. It was a moment of public reckoning, and Janet's refusal to acknowledge her mistake was only making things worse. Just then, the captain's voice crackled through the intercom again, this time with more urgency. "Flight attendants, I need confirmation we're ready to depart." "What's going on?" David's eyes widened. The situation was clearly not under control, and the captain was getting irritated. "Captain, we've got a passenger here who's refusing to move," David said quickly. "He's claiming to belong in first class, but I've checked the manifest, and it's not matching." Marcus's calm voice cut through the air again, louder now as he responded directly. "I'm Marcus Williams, CEO of Williams Aviation Consulting. My ticket clearly shows my seat is 2A. I'm not some random passenger." The words hit like a thunderclap. There was a stunned pause in the cabin. The room seemed to freeze for a moment as the reality of the situation set in. The flight attendants and David were now processing the significance of the name. Marcus Williams was no ordinary passenger. David turned to Janet, his expression shifting from confusion to recognition. The name meant something, but Janet, still refusing to believe it, simply shook her head. "No, that's impossible," she muttered, though she sounded less sure now. "A CEO doesn't look like that. Not in a hoodie." Her refusal to accept the truth, even when faced with undeniable evidence, was becoming increasingly painful to witness. But Marcus was done with waiting. Without saying another word, he reached into his jacket pocket again, and this time, he pulled out a small black card. It was an American Express Centurion card, the infamous black card, reserved for the wealthiest and most powerful people in the world. The silence in the cabin deepened as he held it up, not for show but as a clear statement of who he was. But that wasn't all. As he pulled out the card, he also revealed a small leather folder, a corporate ID badge inside it. It was undeniable. Marcus Williams was no ordinary passenger. Janet's face drained of color. She glanced at the ID, then back at Marcus. The implications were hitting her now hard. She had misjudged him entirely. The CEO of an aviation consulting company, his company responsible for servicing planes all over the country, had been standing right in front of her, and she had treated him like a fraud. Marcus's eyes remained steady. "I'm the CEO of Williams Aviation Consulting," he said, his voice quiet but laced with authority. "My company handles the maintenance contracts for American Airlines. We employ thousands of people across the country. The seat I'm sitting in is my rightful seat." Lily's live stream was now at 10,000 viewers. The comments were coming in faster than anyone could read. Boom. "This is going down in history," someone typed. "Can't believe she's still denying it. Watch this woman lose her job." Janet's eyes flicked back and forth, clearly rattled. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words never came. Marcus had completely taken the power back. David, who had been quiet until now, stepped forward, his voice tight with embarrassment. "Janet, I think we need to resolve this now," he said, his tone firm. This is Marcus Williams. This is a huge mistake." But Janet's pride wasn't going to let her back down. She wasn't ready to admit the truth. "This can't be him," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "He doesn't belong up here. CEOs don't dress like this." At that moment, the plane was moments away from taking off, but Marcus wasn't backing down. His words were no longer about the seat assignment. They were about something much bigger: corporate accountability, power dynamics, and bias. He wasn't just claiming his seat in first class. He was claiming the right to be treated with dignity, just like anyone else. The passengers were all watching now, some with phones raised high, capturing every moment. Janet had become the spectacle, her refusal to acknowledge her mistake turning her into the villain of the story, and Marcus was the one pushing back, with grace, confidence, and an unshakable calm. "Call your corporate office," Marcus said. "Ask them about the Williams Aviation contract. The one you've been working with for over a year. You should check in with them before we proceed." David was still trying to process what was happening. He had never seen a situation escalate this quickly, let alone in the air. But he could no longer deny the weight of Marcus's words. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom once more. "I need confirmation," the captain's voice demanded, sharper now. "We need to leave, and we need to leave now. What's going on up there?" David took one last look at Janet, and for the first time the realization began to sink in. He had to make a decision, and fast. The air in the cabin was suffocating. The tension was palpable, the silence almost unbearable. Marcus stood in front of Janet, unwavering, his eyes never leaving hers. He knew that this moment was about more than just a seating dispute. It was a moment that would force a shift, not just in how he was treated, but in how the world saw discrimination. David, still unsure of how to proceed, fumbled with his words. His eyes were wide and his voice trembled as he glanced back at Janet, still standing rigidly in defiance. "Janet, we need to resolve this," he said, his tone low but urgent. "This isn't just about seating anymore." Marcus didn't flinch. His focus was absolute. "Exactly," Marcus said calmly. "It's about respect. It's about understanding that no matter how someone looks, they're entitled to the same dignity as anyone else. I'm not asking for anything that's not mine." Janet's face had turned a shade paler. The words were sinking in, but her pride was still holding her back. She had built this narrative in her mind, one where someone like Marcus didn't belong in first class. And now, faced with the cold reality of her mistake, she couldn't quite bring herself to back down. The captain's voice suddenly crackled over the intercom again. The impatience in his voice was clear. "Flight attendants, I need an immediate update. What's going on with this seating issue?" The tone wasn't just irritated. It was annoyed. Time was running out. David swallowed hard, then shot a glance at Janet. He could feel the gravity of the situation crushing down on him. His hands trembled slightly, a direct result of the pressure now bearing down on him. His eyes flicked to Marcus's calm, confident stance and then back to Janet's panicked expression. It was clear to him now. Janet had made a mistake, and it was one that was only getting bigger with every passing second. "I'm sorry, Mr. Williams," David said, his voice shaky but respectful. "I'll handle this." Janet's eyes widened. "David, no," she protested, her voice a harsh whisper. But David, realizing the gravity of the situation, walked past her without a second glance. Marcus stood there, his posture as still as a mountain. The calm confidence was almost contagious. He wasn't demanding anything out of malice. He was simply insisting on the truth. Lily's live stream had exploded, surpassing 15,000 viewers. The comments were flooding in faster than anyone could read. "I can't believe what I'm watching," one comment read. "This is so messed up. Someone needs to get this woman off the flight," another person typed. "She doesn't know who she's messing with." The buzz of social media was intensifying the moment, turning it into a public spectacle. This wasn't just about a CEO and a flight attendant anymore. This was about systemic bias, about the world seeing what happens when someone stands up for themselves, and when someone else refuses to listen. David walked briskly toward the cockpit. He knew the captain would demand an explanation. He had to get this sorted out, and fast. The plane couldn't sit on the tarmac forever, and the situation was spiraling out of control. Janet stood there, frozen. She watched Marcus with narrowed eyes, struggling to maintain any semblance of control. Her hands trembled slightly, the weight of the situation sinking in. Her instincts screamed at her to act, to assert authority, but the realization was clear. She had made a fatal error. As the minutes ticked by, the pressure intensified. The passengers in the cabin were watching closely, some still recording. Janet was no longer in control of the narrative. The world was watching her, and they were seeing her for what she really was, a woman who had let her prejudices dictate her actions. Marcus broke the silence again, his voice unwavering. "Just make the call," he said quietly, "and you'll see I'm not the problem here. It's the system you're working in." Janet's lips trembled, but no words came out. She was trapped. There was no easy way out of this now. The intercom crackled to life once more. "Flight attendants, are we ready?" The captain's voice was tight now, more frustrated than ever. "This delay is unacceptable." And that's when it happened. Marcus's gaze never wavered from Janet. The look in his eyes said it all. He wasn't just asking for a seat anymore. He wasn't just asking for his rights. He was showing her that power could be wielded with dignity, and that real change doesn't come from staying silent. It comes from standing up. Janet finally took a shaky breath. She reached for the radio, her hands unsteady, her resolve crumbling under the weight of the pressure. "Janet, don't." David's voice came from behind her. "You need to fix this." But it was too late. The world was already watching. The ripple effect of this moment would echo far beyond the confines of this plane. "I'll call corporate," Janet muttered under her breath, as though she were finally accepting what she had known all along. She reached for the radio, her hand still shaking but now with a resigned acceptance of what was coming. David watched her closely, his face filled with a mix of disbelief and regret. He had seen enough to know that this wasn't just a mistake on Janet's part. It was a flaw in the entire system, one that had allowed such discrimination to persist unchecked for far too long. Marcus didn't wait. He was already several steps ahead, pulling out his phone, the screen glowing brightly in the dim light of the cabin. He wasn't just waiting for Janet to make a call. He had already begun making his own calls that would change everything. The tension in the cabin had shifted from uncomfortable silence to quiet anticipation. The weight of what had just transpired hung in the air like a thick fog, but Marcus was no longer merely reacting to the situation. He was orchestrating it. As Janet's hand hovered over the radio, preparing to make the call, the moment felt like it was suspended in time. Passengers could feel it, that collective breath held in anticipation. This wasn't just a dispute about seating anymore. This was the kind of moment that could redefine how an entire institution viewed its customers, its staff, and the systems they all operated in. Marcus's voice cut through the stillness. "Janet," he said, his tone soft but firm, "I don't want you to lose your job over this. But this is bigger than any of us. What happens next is up to you." The words landed like a hammer. Janet's hand dropped to her side. Her eyes flickered back to Marcus, a brief flicker of uncertainty passing through her. But her pride held her there firmly in place. "I don't want to lose my job," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. But there was no time for sympathy. The truth was she had already crossed a line, and no amount of regret could take back what had already happened. David, who had been standing silently behind them, now took a step forward. His voice was low, almost apologetic. "Janet, it's over. We need to fix this now, for all our sakes," he said, his words carrying the weight of someone who had finally realized the scope of the mess they were in. Janet's face flushed with the deep shame of someone who had been caught in a lie, and worse, who had refused to acknowledge the truth even when it was staring her right in the face. The delay was becoming intolerable. The passengers in the cabin, many of them now recording the incident, were growing restless. It was only a matter of time before this story hit the media, and they all knew it. The phone cameras were still pointed at Janet, capturing her every hesitation, every moment of indecision. Marcus, his calmness never wavering, finally turned his attention to his phone, his fingers moving with purpose across the screen. The phone buzzed. "Incoming call." Janet hesitated for a moment, then finally lifted the radio to her mouth. But before she could speak, Marcus's phone vibrated again. This time it was a text. He glanced down, read it, and then looked up. His gaze met Janet's, unwavering. "Looks like we've got the answer we need," Marcus said quietly, but with an undeniable edge of finality in his voice. "Corporate's been informed. They know everything, and they're aware of exactly what's happening here." Janet froze. Her eyes widened. "Corporate knows?" She repeated, the realization settling in. Marcus nodded. "They've been informed. I've already spoken with someone. In fact, I think they're about to speak with you themselves." The room seemed to hold its breath. The phone buzzed once again, and this time, Marcus answered it on speaker, allowing everyone in the cabin to hear the conversation clearly. The voice on the other end was unmistakable, firm, and professional. "This is Janet Rodriguez," she said, the voice crackling slightly through the speakers. "I've just received a report. We're aware of the situation and we're reviewing everything." "Janet," Marcus interjected smoothly, "I'd like to make sure you understand the gravity of what's happening here. There's no going back. This is a direct violation of our agreement. You've witnessed discrimination firsthand and failed to act. And now there are consequences." The captain's voice, now clearly agitated, came over the intercom again. "We need to resolve this, now. This flight can't go anywhere until we know what's happening up front." David, still standing by, tried to regain some semblance of control. "We're working on it, Captain. Just a few more minutes," he said, his voice strained. Meanwhile, Janet had dropped her radio. Her face had gone pale. Marcus could see the realization sinking in. "What happens next is simple," Marcus said. His voice was calm, but each word landed with deliberate precision. Your actions or lack of actions are being documented, Janet. Your corporate office is about to hold you accountable for this. There was no denying it now. Janet had crossed a line and there was no going back. Corporate's already taking action, Marcus continued, his tone never wavering. This incident isn't just going to disappear. And it's not just about me. This is about corporate responsibility, about ensuring that every passenger, every person gets the respect they deserve. No exceptions. No more excuses. He paused, letting his words sink in. Lily, still streaming live, captured every moment. Her viewers had swelled to nearly 25,000, and the flood of comments had become overwhelming. This is unreal, someone typed. This guy's a total boss. She's done. Justice in real time. Another comment shouted. I can't believe this is happening. Marcus didn't stop there. The wheels were already in motion. He had already pushed for change. The phone in his hand buzzed again, but this time, it wasn't a call. This was a text from corporate. Confirming everything he had said, he looked up at Janet, who was standing now, completely frozen in place. You see, Janet, he said with finality, you're a part of something bigger. You were supposed to be an example of how people are treated with respect, no matter what they look like. But instead, you've exposed a much deeper issue. The plane sat on the tarmac, the minutes ticking by, but it wasn't just a delay now. It was a moment that would have lasting consequences. Corporate's moving forward with the audit. Your behavior, the way you've treated me and others, has been documented, and now the world is seeing it. David was quiet now, looking at Janet with a mix of frustration and pity. He had known she was a problem, but this was something else entirely. Marcus gave a small nod toward Janet, who stood there utterly defeated. You'll be hearing from corporate soon. This isn't just about this flight. This is about every flight, every passenger, every system that's failed. The revelation hung in the air, and for the first time the tension seemed to break. Janet's reality had shifted, shattered really. And then Marcus did something that no one had expected. He took a step toward Janet, his tone softer now. Janet, he said, his voice almost gentle, I don't want you to lose your job over this. But this is a learning moment, a chance for you to understand how bias works, how it impacts others. The question now is, are you ready to make a change? The weight of Marcus's words seemed to hang in the air for a long moment. Janet stood frozen, her face pale, her mind racing to process the impossible truth unfolding before her. This wasn't just about a simple mistake anymore. It was about everything she thought she knew, about power, privilege, and the weight of her assumptions. And Marcus, standing before her with quiet resolve, was the mirror that reflected the harsh reality she'd spent years ignoring. The captain's voice came over the intercom once more, but this time there was no irritation. It was cold, professional, and final. Flight attendants, I need confirmation. Are we departing or not? The urgency in the captain's tone matched the growing tension in the cabin. Passengers were shifting, anxious, their eyes flicking between Marcus and the scene unfolding at the front of the plane. Many were still filming, documenting the moment for the world to see. Janet's hands were trembling. She reached for her radio, but the motion was slow, hesitant. This time there was no defiance. There was only the weight of the realization that she had been caught in a lie so big, it would reverberate across the airline industry. She keyed the radio, but the words didn't come out right away. She swallowed hard. Janet, what's happening? David's voice came tight with frustration, but there was no denying the exhaustion in his words now. I've called corporate. Janet finally managed, her voice quieter than before. They know. The words seemed to echo in the cabin. Corporate knew, and in that moment it was as though the entire plane collectively exhaled. Janet's defiance had been shattered. Marcus, the quiet force at the center of it all, had forced her to face what she had been unwilling to confront. But Marcus wasn't done. He knew that this was only the beginning. The real work was about to unfold. He took a slow breath, his calm demeanor never faltering as he addressed the passengers who had been silently watching this drama unfold. The room seemed to quiet, the tension hanging thick, waiting for the next revelation. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly throughout the cabin. This is more than just a seating dispute. This is about something far larger than any one of us. It's about the systems that shape the way we treat people based on how they look, based on assumptions, and based on the color of their skin. It's about the power of standing up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable. His words resonated in the cabin, and for a brief moment, everyone was still. Marcus's message was clear. This wasn't just a personal victory for him. It was a victory for every person who had ever been unfairly judged, unfairly mistreated. It was a message for all who had ever been denied their dignity simply because of who they were. Janet's eyes were now fixed on the floor. The truth she had fought so hard to deny was undeniable, and the reality of what that meant. Her role in perpetuating this bias, in making assumptions, in treating someone unfairly based on her own preconceived notions was too much to ignore. But Marcus wasn't finished. You see, the truth is, he continued, this isn't an isolated incident. This isn't just about one flight attendant or one CEO. This is about the systemic issues that many people face every day, the systems that have been in place for far too long, systems that decide who belongs and who doesn't, based on nothing more than appearance. He let his words sink in. The passengers were listening, hanging on every word. For many, it was a revelation. For others, it was an uncomfortable truth they had avoided acknowledging. But this moment, this is the turning point, Marcus said, his voice unwavering. This is the chance to make a change, to learn, to grow, to confront the biases we all carry whether we realize them or not. Janet was still standing there, her face a mix of guilt and disbelief. But she wasn't alone in this moment. There were eyes on her now, thousands of eyes. People all over the world were watching, and they were all asking the same question. Will she take responsibility? Will she change? The moment stretched on, but it wasn't just about Marcus anymore. It was about everyone who had been complicit in letting this kind of behavior continue unchecked. And now the power of accountability was here. Finally, the silence broke. Janet, the truth is the system failed you too, Marcus said softly. It failed you by allowing you to believe that someone like me didn't belong in first class. But it's not too late to change. It's not too late to learn, and it's not too late to fix what's broken. David, who had been standing silently for some time, now stepped forward. His voice was firm, and there was a sense of finality in his tone. We need to get this resolved, David said, turning to Janet. You've been given a chance here. What happens next is on you. There was a long pause as Janet seemed to wrestle with the gravity of her situation, and then, in a moment that seemed to take forever to unfold, she finally nodded. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I was wrong. I made a mistake. The words were small, but they were powerful. For the first time, Janet had acknowledged what everyone had been waiting for. She had been wrong, and she was ready to admit it. Marcus gave her a small nod, his expression softening just a little. Thank you, he said simply. But that wasn't the end of it. This moment, this confrontation, wasn't just about personal apologies. It was about the steps that would come next, the changes that needed to be made, the accountability that would shape the future. The captain's voice came over the intercom again, but this time it was calm, almost resigned. Flight attendants, are we ready for departure? The impatience was gone, replaced by a sense of understanding. Janet looked up, her eyes still filled with uncertainty but now with a hint of resolve. She turned to David, who nodded at her, signaling that it was time to move forward. She reached for the radio, her fingers steady now as she spoke into it. We're ready for departure, she said, her voice carrying the weight of what had just transpired. As the plane finally began to taxi down the runway, the passengers could feel it. Something had shifted in the air. The tension that had hung over them like a cloud had dissipated, replaced by a quiet sense of satisfaction. This wasn't just the end of a flight. It was the beginning of something bigger. Marcus's phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't just another message. It was confirmation of the next steps. Corporate would be moving forward with the audit, implementing immediate changes to address systemic biases and discrimination. This moment, this confrontation, had been the catalyst, and as the plane soared into the sky, the passengers knew they had witnessed something extraordinary. This wasn't just a story about one flight attendant and one CEO. It was the story of what happens when people are willing to stand up, when they refuse to stay silent in the face of injustice. And in the end, it was the story of transformation, both personal and corporate, that would echo far beyond the confines of this flight.